if you suffer with anxiety, particularly social anxiety, I mean, it's a pretty safe bet that over the years you started to avoid certain situations because you've got anxious in that situation, and as a result you don't want to go there again. And that's perfectly logical. Why would you want to go to somewhere that makes you feel uncomfortable? Unfortunately, it's the worst thing you can do, because when you start avoiding certain situations, you make that monster even bigger in your mind. And we start to avoid all sorts of things. And it's not, I work with a lot of people with all sorts of anxiety disorders, particularly things like agoraphobia. Now, nobody ever starts with agoraphobia. Agoraphobia starts with anxiety in one particular place. They have, say, anxiety attack when they're in a supermarket. And they go, right, that's it, I'm never going there again. So they avoid that one. So they go to another brand of supermarket, and then they have a panic attack in that one. So they think, I'm not going there again. Then it's like, I'm not going shopping, and then I'm not leaving the house, because they've avoided so many things and everything has become a monster. And that's the worst thing you can do. Avoidance is what creates more anxiety. So you need to do something different. Someone a lot wiser than me many years ago, called Albert Einstein, said the definition of insanity is to keep on doing the same thing and to expect a different result. So here's the deal. What you're doing is not working. You have to do something different. Now, here's what I propose you do. And let me just sort of lay this out so what you can see what you have been doing and what you need to do. So there's some event that happens. It could be a social event. It could be going into Starbucks and ordering a coffee. It could be going on a social situation. There's some event external to yourself. And when you either go to that event or you think about that event, you have a negative thought. That negative thought triggers a part of your brain called the amygdala. The amygdala then sends a signal down to your adrenal glands to produce adrenaline. Your heart rate goes up, your breathing changes, blood goes from your stomach to your limbs. So should you have to run, should you have to fight, you can. And you start to panic. In that situation, you then run. Get the heck out of that place, because the place is scary. The place is the monster. And then you avoid that situation. And this is what the problem is. And this can happen in so many situations. You end up having negative thoughts, amygdala firing up, having a panic attack, running and avoiding, and then everywhere becomes scary. Now, in traditional CBT or psychology, they'll tell you that what you need to do is exposure therapy. Now, an exposure therapy is doing the very thing that you're scared of. Now, this can work if it's done properly. But on most situations, it's not done properly. And if it's not done properly and it's not done to its conclusion, it's going to make the problem worse. So let me give that example. Let's say there's some event and you're having a negative thought, your amygdala fires up, but you're being told to do it. So let's say you've got social anxiety and you can't go into Starbucks and order a cup of coffee and sit down on the table by yourself, right? So according to exposure therapy, what they'll do is they'll make you go into Starbucks, order a cup of coffee and sit down in there by yourself. And of course, if you do that, you're going to be scared, because that's what the problem is. And so if you go into that situation thinking, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, you're making the problem worse. You're firing up that amygdala even further. And so what will happen is you won't calm down in that situation, because you're still running this same negative thought going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm going to die. And it's going to make it worse. And then you come running, screaming out of there, and you quit exposure therapy. It's not going to work like that. What you have to do is be in a better state and bring in a higher thought. What do I mean by this? Well, let me give you an example from my own life. When I was a kid, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I used to be terrified of fairground rides. Absolutely terrified of them. And my parents used to take me and my older brother to the local fair when it used to come into town. And I would not go on any of them. I'd scream and shout, and my dad would take my brother on the fairground ride. And I would sit there with my mum, holding my mum's hand, screaming and shouting until someone bought me some candy floss or something like that. And I was terrified of them, absolutely terrified. And this carried on until I was about 13 years old. And when I was about 13 years old, I'm now old enough to go to the fair with my friends, not my parents, right? Now, I'm 13 years old, I'm still scared of fairground rides, but I'm far more scared of looking like a chicken in front of my friends, particularly the girls, right? So I had to suck it up. I had to bring in a higher resource that said, I'm gonna do this. I've got to do this. I can't show that I'm scared. I don't care if I'm scared. I've got to get on this fairground ride. I've got to do it. I don't care if I make a fool of myself. I've got to do this. And because I got myself into this state, I got on the fairground ride. And I can tell you, the first time I did it, I didn't enjoy it. I was putting on a fake smile, fake laughter. But I did it. But then we went on the next ride. And this time I didn't have to put up so much of a pretense. I kind of did start to enjoy it. And then by the end of the night, I was okay. And now, all those years later, if I go to Disney, I'm the first one on the biggest ride because I've changed the association. I changed the association by having a stronger state, by having a higher thought. So here's how you need to break this, because you need to stop avoiding these situations, because the avoidance is the problem. So what you need to do is to bring in a higher thought. Like I don't care if I make a fool of myself. I don't care if I'm embarrassed. I don't care if I start sweating. I don't care if I get embarrassed. I don't care if I go beet red. I'm gonna do it anyway because I want my life back. So when you get this real reason of why you want to make this change, that you want your life back, then if you bring in this state, you can go into Starbucks, order the coffee, sit down, and I tell you, the first couple of times you do it, you're not going to be comfortable, but it's not going to be as bad as you think. And then the third time and the fourth time, it's going to get easier and easier and easier. And then you wonder, what the heck have I been worrying about? Because what you'll be doing is retraining your amygdala. So when you have this higher thought, look, I don't care if if I get embarrassed, I don't care if I have a panic attack, I'm going to do it anyway. What happens then is this part of the brain called the amygdala gets confused. Like, huh? Why aren't you reacting? There might be a slight reaction. It might send a little bit of adrenaline through your system, but it's going to be nowhere near as much as it was. And then if you stay in that environment, the amygdala is going to go, well, hang on a minute. There is nothing here that's scary. And it's going to calm down, and then you're going to be calm. I'm not going to suggest that it will take just one time of doing this, but if you do it with consistency and you have this higher thought of, I'm going to do it anyway, you'll get over this. And I want to tell you a story. This is, there's a book called The Tibetan Book of the Dead. And in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there's a story in there, legend, about what happens if you die. And according to this legend, if you die, or when you die, you are sent to this place which is completely dark. Completely dark. And out of nowhere, suddenly there's this big monster. And this big monster is the sum total of everything you've ever feared in your life. Yeah. And you've got two choices. You can either face the monster or you can run. Now, if you run, you'll be safe for a while, but you'll be alone in the dark again. And then what will happen is another monster will appear. Now, this monster will be slightly less scarier than the first monster, but it will still be scary. And according to the legend, depending on what month you die, so let's say, for example, you die in January, which has got 31 days, you face 31 monsters, each slightly less scary than the other. And again, every monster you face, you've got a choice. Fight the monster, run. If you run away from every monster, according to the legend, then when you get reincarnated, you come back as one of the lowliest creatures, like an earthworm. And you have to go through this whole cycle of reincarnation over and over and again because you haven't learned your lesson. However, if when that first monster appears, you face the monster and you go towards the monster, what you find is the monster has no teeth. That everything you feared was nothing more than a figment of your imagination. It was just a thought. It was just images, words, and sensations. And then what happens? You ascend. You've learned your lesson and you go to heaven, or to nirvana in their case. And this is a really powerful lesson for us as well, because when you start to face these fears, you realize the monster has no teeth. It has no teeth. It's all been in your thoughts. It's been a problem with your thinking. And so what I want you to do, to leave you with this thought, is the very fact that you're thinking all these things means it's not actually happening at that moment. The very fact that you're thinking about it means it's not happening. Now you might think, what on earth is he talking about there? I'll give you an example. Obviously we're not meeting here, but if you were coming into my office, I'd ask you the question, have you ever driven on ice in the winter? And most people have had that experience, although I worked with a guy in Dubai recently and he'd never driven on ice. But most people have had the experience of driving on ice in the winter and skidding. Now, what do you do in that situation? Do you suddenly go, whoa, take your hands off the wheel and wait for the crash? No, you react. You don't, if you've got any sense, you don't slam your foot on the brake, you steer yourself out of the skid. And typically you're okay. Now, in that moment of time, you're just reacting. You're not thinking, you're reacting. There is no fear, you're just reacting. 5 minutes down the road, you might pull over and go, oh my God, I could have died. At that moment, you're thinking. And so when you're actually in a real life or death situation, you're not thinking, you're reacting. It's only when you're thinking that you start to have a problem. So the very fact that you're thinking means that you're not in that, it's not happening right now. The very fact that you're thinking means it's not happening right now. I had an example a little while ago. I worked with a woman who was a teacher, and she had post-traumatic stress disorder from an incident that happened at school. Now, what had happened was she was teaching young children, 7, 8 or 9, and they were at a gym class. And suddenly one of the little boys had an asthma attack. He was an asthmatic, he had an asthma attack, and he couldn't breathe, he's going blue, and he didn't have his inhaler on. Now, my client, the teacher, dealt with the situation. All the kids are screaming and crying, oh my God, the teaching assistant's panicking. But the teacher that I'm working with, she's dealing with it. She shouts at the kids, get out the way, get out the way. You, go and get his inhaler from the locker. They go and get their inhaler. She then calms the boy down, puts the inhaler in him and starts to get him to breathe. And sure enough, he survives. Ambulance turns up, he goes to hospital, gets checked over. He lives, right? All the way through that, she's reacting. Half an hour later, she goes to the staff room and suddenly goes, oh my God, he could have died. He could have died. The child on my watch could have died. Suddenly, she's having a panic attack over something that did not happen. She's thinking about something and her whole body's going into this reaction over something that never happened. She forgot she was thinking. And when I worked with her, we started working with these thoughts and got her to realize, you know what? The very fact that you're thinking means that it's not happening. So I'll leave you with that, but you've got to face the things. It's a toothless monster. And the moment you realize it's a toothless monster and go in with a better attitude, like, screw this, I'm going to do this because I want my life back. I'm not going to live my life another second in fear. Then you get your life back and you stop avoiding things.